So this next project started in June 2024 and finished just last week in March 2025. This is a project to try and make 3 similar boxes to the recipe box I made for my sister. She said, hey, why don't you make some of those if you can't think of what to do? So I'm making some of those. And as you could tell, it took a really long time, not because the process itself took so long, but just other projects came up and yeah. So here I'm working on cutting up all the different furniture scraps that I had that were about the right size and getting a bunch of different pieces with the bandsaw and then getting them all to be flat. Mostly this is for the sides, but I also did some for the lids later. But this specific section was just for the sides. So I'm doing a bunch of pieces of maple and some rosewood and just a bunch of pieces. And yeah, so it worked out pretty good. I like the tools. I definitely like the tools. And here I'm working on the sides, cutting them to the width. So the goal is to have 2 top and bottom colors that are the same on the sides and then a different color center stripe. So based on the wood that I had for the pieces of fancy maple and the rosewood and whatnot, I was able to do 1.5 boxes, as you can see there, 1.5 pieces that would fit for 1 box, and then later it's for the other boxes 1.5 of the other color of that there with the oak and the green stripe. And what I'm doing here is I was using tape to do tape is a clamp basically. And then once that's all glued up with the wood glue and such, run it back through to get them all cleaned up on the drum sander. That drum sander is so nice. It definitely works great. The only issue is if you get sap on the belt, the sanding belt, you have to change it, but that's no big deal. So here I'm cutting the pieces to width for the wide sides and the ends. And boy, it's going fast enough you can't even see the wood. Oh well, I guess 3200 was a little bit fast. Here doing box joints. Boy, if only it took that fast to do box joints, that would be so much easier. But yeah, after this, all the box joints and sides are all sorted, so that's cool. Oh look, woodworking is happening again. So I have one new recipe box that's going to be maple and rosewood. I have one that has 2 sides maple rosewood, 2 sides oak and some other hardwood, one that's completely oak and some other hardwood. This is with that oak and some other hardwood. I don't know if that's zebra wood or something else. It's a cool greenish color. It's not poplar because it's greens and blacks. Poplar's not usually greens and blacks. Should be cool. So there'll be 3 new recipe boxes once I finally get things finished. So that last voiceover comment was wrong. I only got 1 box done. I didn't do the other ones. But this way I got a different angle for doing it so you can see it slightly better. So that's kind of cool. So here's just going through the other sides and getting the other pieces done. And you have to do the 2 pieces like that so that the sides match up and mesh correctly. That's why you do it that way. And then more drum sander to get it sorted out and make sure that the thicknesses are all good and everything's all sorted. And basically making sure to get the widths good, everything is proper, no bad saw cuts, no saw marks or anything else. And just try and get any of the tear out that was on there from the router to get that cleaned up. And here we're gluing it all together using super glue on the corners. There you can see from the out. Once I get it mostly sorted, then I go back through and fill it all in with more super glue. And do the second box. This one's the one that's all oak. And boy, if only I knew what that greenish one was. I don't know what that one is. If anybody else knows, leave it in the comments what wood goes that color. But it ends up looking really amazing when it's done. So regardless of what it is, it turned out awesome. And then here, cutting off the edges of the box joints and getting that all cleaned up as best I can. And that takes a long time when you have 3 boxes and lots of little joints. And you have to go slow and careful because otherwise you have issues. And then now I'm going back through and putting wood in any of the gaps, because if there's any sort of gap, I'm going through and filling it in, because sometimes with box joints there's tear out. So I went back through and filled in all the spots, and then because it seems to work better, as you saw, I put super glue down in the end grain because that seems to hold up a little bit better. It also gives a little bit more contrast on the box, which is kind of cool. And then lots of sanding. I didn't record all the sanding for everything because sanding gets boring even at high speeds, but I ran through the different grits and then we're doing the lids, and that's good. And yeah, so that's all good. And again, using tape as clamps, just because when they're this tiny, it's hard to use actual clamps. And then here I'm trimming the ends off of the lids and then running them through the belt or drum sander again. Get that all cleaned up from the glue, and that's all great. The only issues with drum sanders is you have to keep them clean. So if you notice sap is building up, make sure to clean it with the rubber stick. And then here I took apart a maple crib piece because I'm using the pieces from the crib to cut up and use for the lid trim and the bottom trim on the boxes. You can see going through different cuts, figuring it out, trying to write down numbers and things. Try and make notes. It's always good to have notes. I should have paid attention to the notes because, as you'll see later, I cut things I shouldn't have. I fixed it later too, but yeah, this last section here I should not have done like several of those cuts, but that's all right. We can fix it later. Now comes the hardest part for doing these kind of insane lid corners, is cutting off the final piece when it's not really sturdy but still trying to get it square. This piece started out looking like this, and then I cut the lid slot, and then this bottom piece, and then this top piece, and then I worked through and got rid of the rest. But now I got to get rid of this bottom piece such that that will fit like this, more or less, on the side of the box, or the top corner of the box. Luckily I have two test pieces. Because this has a little bit of width, it's somewhat stable sitting like that. It'd be more stable if I wasn't cutting that off, but if I have this thing angled like that and pushing down and tight, and then this will hold it square this way and hopefully this way, and if I run that across, I'm hoping that the blade will take that out. We'll see. Let's see if I can screw it up. But again, I have two test pieces, so if I screw up the first one, I can come up with a different method for the second one, and then I can try and do that before I screw up the real stuff. I had to do this last cut to clean it up, but that's all right. Okay, well, that basically worked. Some worked better than others, but that happens. So the first few that I did, for whatever reason, and you may not be able to see, there's a slightly deeper groove at the bottom by like a 32nd or 64th right along the edge, so this must have either creeped up or such. So partway through, after I noticed that, I turned it so the blade went down a little bit, and some of the later ones are more straight across. There's the tiniest sliver left, but that's okay. You can just bend it kind of like that, and then bend it the other way. And this is very hard to do with one hand. It'd be much easier with two, but then a little piece comes off. So then it's pretty good. That's one of the ones where the edge is slightly down. So I'll have to see how bad that ends up looking and if I need to trim that up or such, but at least the rough shape is mostly done. So now I'll go through, clean up these edges, and then test fit it on the side of the box and see how it looks. Hopefully it'll work. Well, I realized I did this differently than what I had originally planned. So now I just get to make a new plan. Stuff's never easy. It does look okay, I think, and it fits in with the lid, but I don't have the edge like I initially had thought. And yes, chisels are sharp, fun stuff. It took me a couple days, but I figured out how to fix the lids. I just need to cut little strips to put in there. And here I made sure that they were all going to fit. There I made a little jig and gluing them in with super glue, and that all worked. And it's on the interior, so you only see it when the box is open, so it's fine. It ended up looking nice when I was done later. I did have to do more work because of it, but it's better than scrapping the whole thing. And now I'm working on cutting the trim pieces for the lid. And this slicer is awesome, but it's also exceedingly dangerous because those blades are obscenely sharp. That's why there's that little handle. I eventually later screwed up and tried to pick it up wrong, and luckily it didn't get bad cuts, but if you notice band-aids later, that's why. It's fine. I know not to touch it there anymore, ever. But yeah, definitely always use the handle. As you can see on the side there where the blades come down, I accidentally grabbed the edge. There, as you can see on the one spot, how to trim or how the trim looks. There I was trimming the actual lid pieces, and now I was working on the bottom section. And I have a sheet off the end to catch the extra pieces, like when they slide off the saw, so they don't hit the floor. So that worked great. And then here I'm cutting some fancy plywood for the bottoms. I had a slight miscut on one of them, so I had to go back and fix that, but that was fine too. It's hard sometimes with the measurements that you get slightly off, and then, especially with putting the tape on to keep it from tearing out, you cut slightly wrong and then you have to go back and fix it, but that's fine. So now we're doing the final pieces for the bottom trim and getting those all sorted. And yeah, so that's working good. The lids are good. The lids aren't glued yet, I don't think. That's why there's still tape on the corners, but I'm trying to make sure all the bottoms and everything work. And eventually got all that sorted. So that was good. And yeah, the way I was doing it, I was just starting at one corner and then working my way around the box and making sure everything lined up, and then going back and retrimming and making sure it all worked and retrimming. And here I am fixing things and gluing things up. And this was, I'm gluing it into the box with the bottom because that one had a slight issue for the height of it. So the bottom trims were slightly off, so I did that to be able to fix the height, and that let me fix the height. So now I'm going back through and gluing the lids, and just do one corner at a time and make sure everything's taped and squared and all that sorted, and then getting all the other corners, and then of course lots of sanding. Just after about every step there was sanding. Like I said, not everything was recorded. And here, because I need to split the lid, have it taped up and run it through the bandsaw. And this is actually a really good thing because that let me smooth out and get the surfaces such they had a near perfect match. That's much easier running through the drum sander to get that than trying to do it manually. And then here I'm gluing down the lower piece of trim that goes on the box itself, and then making sure that's all sorted and sealed. And now I'm putting on the little badges. And then I get to work on the hinges. So using the marking knife, the Dremel with the plunge router, and some carving tools and whatnot to get it sorted. I managed to get that sorted, and then I was able to figure out where the corresponding lid, or I should say corresponding hinge went. And now I'm working on getting all the hinges and sorts drilled for the screws. So these are number 4 screws, and I have steel screws that I use to make sure everything is perfect, and then way at the very end I go back and put in the brass screws. And here I'm doing the little magnet clasps, and you could see there I was also putting the lid pulls in. So originally, I planned to try and cut little circles to go over the holes, and then I realized, why am I making it so challenging and difficult? I don't have to cut circles, I can cut squares. And squares, if you set it up right, that works pretty good. I mean, you can sort of see it if it's that close, but this is 9 inches away. That's, viewing like arm length. That's going to be fine. So I'm going to make little squares instead. That's way simpler. And since I have the super thin flat cutoffs, I have a whole stack of those. I have lots of material. This is the maple that was in the board, and I just used a pencil line because this is the glue line from when I glued the spacer piece back in when I overcut the lid. So I just used a pencil and drew in the line, and that's going to be fine. So I'm going to do it that way for all the pieces. So now after making the squares, I'm putting some of the magnets in, and then I'm doing the lid pulls on the other two boxes. Similarly, put tape on, measure it, use the plunge router to get it sorted out, carving tools and chisels to get it finalized, and then get a friction fit for the lid pulls. So that worked out good. And now I'm working on magnets. That little thing was so worth making in the lathe. That makes it so easy to transfer the position. You just figure out where the center is, side to side, drill the hole, stick it in, put tape on, close the lid, then you have the spot to drill over here. Last time I had to measure both ways carefully, and then measure both ways carefully, and then hope I got it right. This is so much simpler. And that little metal thing I made works so awesome for the magnets. It lines it up perfect. But again, just working on getting the squares cut out. Squares are so much easier than circles. Oh my gosh, that's so much easier. I'm so glad I thought of that. Previous boxes I've used circles, and that took forever to do. The squares took a little bit longer, but I think it ends up working a lot better. And it's easier to get a square to fit than a circle, for sure. At least when it's this tiny. And then I'm starting the finishing, putting the triple thick polyurethane on. So it's finally getting there. So here I'm going down through and doing the bottoms of the lids, and that's all working good. And then doing the insides of the boxes. And then here you can see that I'm working on the hinges. And I'm going through and taking out the stainless, or I should say just a regular steel screws, and working through and making sure the lids are fitting correctly and putting the final brass screws in. So that way it has the brass hinges and brass screws. And that took a lot of fiddling around, and some of the hinges were different. I actually had to swap hinges from some of the boxes, as you saw there, because they were just slightly off, but eventually it all worked. The boxes are done. This one has maple and rosewood sides. It's, of course, hard to hold. And this one has maple and rosewood sides and rosewood lid pulls on both of these because it has the rosewood side. And on the end of this one, it has, I think, oak, and I'm not sure what this green one is, greenish brown one is, and then oak. So that one has oak on the ends, and the different colors. And this one is all oak, and that greenish brown one, top and bottom and back. They have the fancy plywood with the little badges on the bottom, and the tops and bottom trims are maple, and it has the magnet clasp, so that came out nice, and the brass hinges and brass screws. So that came out good. Yeah. Very, very cool. I'll put some pictures at the end of different ones I got for these in the sunshine. I mean, this is in the sunshine now, but yeah, they came out really cool. This one, let's see. The maple trim, I think this is fancy maple, and then walnut, and then the same greenish brown that's in some of these stripes. I'm not sure what that is. And I'm not sure what this one is. That might be some redwood or something that has reddish and white streaks. Then green, then walnut, and then maple. This one has the maple, same as out here, and then oak, and then old growth redwood, and then walnut. I think that's walnut. This might be another color of walnut, and then back and forth. And then this side, there's oak, old growth redwood, zebra wood maybe, and then rosewood, and then back through zebra wood, old growth redwood, and then oak. Yeah. Considering they're all made of recycled furniture, or I should say repurposed furniture that was being thrown out, they came out awesome. These maple top and bottom trims are from a maple crib that someone was throwing out. Same with these maple side pieces. The rosewood was a piece out of a coffee table, and all these other little bits were similar, just pieces of recycled furniture made into something nice. So, very cool.